The Vietnam War was a place where the environment itself fought back. The heat pressed into a man's skin like a heavy hand. The air held a thick, humid weight that made every breath slow. In the deep valleys and dense jungles of Phuoc Tuy province, visibility often dropped to only a few meters. Every step had to be deliberate. Every sound meant risk. It was into this world that the Australian SAS arrived. Quiet, lean, and ready for a style of warfare very different from the American approach dominating the region. Most American units operated on a large scale. Their patrols sometimes moved with dozens of men. Their tactics depended on helicopters, heavy artillery, and aggressive sweeps. They aimed to draw the enemy out, force contact, and break them with superior firepower. For the Americans, the jungle was an obstacle to be pushed through. For the SAS, it was something to blend into. When the Australians entered Vietnam in 1966, the Viet Cong already understood American behavior. They studied the rhythm of U.S. forces, the sound of Hueys in the distance, and the pattern of large patrols. They knew where Americans stepped, how they camped, how they reacted under pressure. But they did not expect a force trained for quiet, patient, deep reconnaissance. The SAS was something new, something unfamiliar, something structured to disappear. Australian SAS doctrine came from hard-earned lessons in Malaya and Borneo. Those conflicts taught them that firepower mattered less than stealth. What mattered most was patience, silence, and absolute discipline. Their units were built for long-range reconnaissance patrols, often moving far ahead of friendly lines, gathering intelligence, tracking enemy activity, and avoiding detection at all costs. They were not meant to fight unless required. Their greatest strength was observation, not attack. A typical SAS patrol consisted of 4 to 6 men. That was it. No platoons, no large squads, just a half-dozen soldiers carrying only what they needed. Their gear was packed tight and wrapped to prevent noise. Their uniforms were faded, blending naturally into the green-brown backdrop. Each man had a clear role. There was a patrol commander, a second-in-command, a scout, a machine gunner, and radio operator. Sometimes duties shifted, but the structure stayed consistent. Their patrol spacing was deliberate. The point man, often the most skilled at reading terrain, stayed several meters ahead. Behind him, each man kept enough distance to avoid bunching, but not so far that communication broke down. They used hand signals, tiny movements, and eye contact. Any spoken word risked detection. Even chewing food was discouraged while on the move. The SAS believed sound was the enemy's greatest ally, and the Viet Cong were experts at hearing what others wished they wouldn't. Conditions made everything harder. The jungle punished careless movement. Roots twisted across the ground like traps waiting to catch a boot. Vines snagged gear. Insects crawled everywhere. At night, the darkness swallowed light so completely that even a small glow could reveal a patrol. The SAS adapted. They moved slowly. They scanned constantly. They froze at unexpected sounds, listening for breathing, a snapped branch, or the faint metallic click that might mean a weapon being prepared. The Viet Cong also operated in small groups, but they stayed close to home territory. Their knowledge of the land gave them an advantage. They cut hidden paths and used the same trails for years. They understood the flow of the forest, how the wind shifted, how animals reacted, how leaves settled after being stepped on. Yet even they were surprised when someone else began using these skills against them. Early Viet Cong reports from Phuoc Tuy told of foreign troops who moved without sound. They said these men did not follow the expected American pattern. They waited for hours. They avoided stepping on dry twigs. They practiced extreme noise discipline. Some enemy scouts said they passed within meters of SAS patrols without realizing it until signs emerged. Tiny markers, footprints soft as shadows, or a faint shift of vegetation. The Australians had another advantage: patience. Their missions often lasted 10 days or longer. They carried just enough food and water to stay alive, sometimes rationing supplies to extend operations. Every moment felt slow, but slowness was their weapon. While larger American patrols drew attention because of size and movement speed, SAS teams slipped deeper and deeper into enemy territory. They watched from concealed positions, sometimes lying still for hours beneath camouflage nets. They observed enemy camps, supply routes, and ambush points. Their goal wasn't to fight first, it was to understand first. Intelligence they gathered shaped entire operations. They reported enemy numbers, morale, weapons, and patterns. That information gave Australian and American forces crucial advantages during major battles. Yet their role remained mostly in the shadows. Even within their own army, few understood how deeply the SAS ventured or how quietly they worked. The jungle's harshness wasn't only physical, it also tested the mind. Constant silence meant constant tension. You never knew if the next step would take you into an ambush or if the enemy watched from behind leaves. Sweat stung eyes, feet blistered, leeches clung to skin. The smell of damp earth mixed with rotting vegetation never faded. But the SAS learned to treat these conditions as part of the mission. Discomfort became normal. Endurance became expected. The Viet Cong noticed this difference. They realized the Australians weren't weakened by the jungle. They adapted to it quickly. Their training prepared them for slow, careful work. Their small unit culture fostered trust. Every man relied on the others completely. That bond allowed them to move with confidence and precision. By the end of their first months in Vietnam, a quiet understanding formed among Viet Cong units. These Australian patrols were different. They did not stumble into traps. They did not make predictable noise. They did not panic when the jungle tightened around them. And they rarely, if ever, revealed their presence until it was too late. This was the beginning of the reputation that would spread across the province. A reputation built not on loud firepower, but on silence, discipline, and deadly patience. A reputation that made the Viet Cong fear the Australian SAS more than any American unit. The jungle rewarded the patient and punished the careless. The Australian SAS understood this better than anyone. Their entire survival depended on a simple truth. The enemy cannot fight what it cannot find. To become invisible, they trained until silence became instinct. Every action, every step, every breath carried purpose. Nothing was accidental. A typical SAS patrol moved slowly, far slower than most armies would tolerate. Their pace wasn't measured in kilometers per hour. It was measured in meters per minute. The point man, usually the most experienced tracker, took a single step, pressed his boot into the ground softly, tested his weight, then froze. He listened. He watched. Only when satisfied that nothing around him reacted would he take another step. Behind him, the next man repeated the rhythm, maintaining several meters of spacing. This staggered movement allowed the patrol to flow silently through the jungle, like a shadow stretching and contracting. Noise discipline formed the heart of their invisibility. The SAS carried lighter loads to avoid metal clicking or fabric rubbing. Radios were padded, canteens were wrapped, magazines were secured with tape. Even small tools were tied down to prevent rattling. They drank water quietly, poured slowly to avoid gurgling sounds that traveled farther in thick vegetation. They adjusted their weapons slowly, never snapping a bolt or switching safety catches unnecessarily. In the jungle, the tiniest unnatural sound stood out. The SAS made none. Their uniforms also helped. Instead of bright equipment or polished boots, they wore faded greens and browns. Sweat and mud darkened their gear until every man blended into the forest floor. They broke up their silhouettes with foliage, tucking leaves and grass into their webbing. Even their faces were darkened with charcoal or mud. A human shape could be recognized instantly, so they erased it. Hand signals replaced spoken words. A clenched fist meant stop. 2 fingers pointed downward meant freeze. A slow wave meant shift position. The patrol used a language of small gestures that were easy to miss, even up close. Speaking was almost never allowed. In fact, some teams went days without saying a single word while in enemy territory. The silence wasn't just a tactic, it became a state of mind. Terrain reading played a major role in their stealth. The SAS trained to understand every part of the jungle, soft soil, animal tracks, natural gaps in vegetation. They didn't push through obstacles. They worked around them. They used existing openings to reduce noise. The point man studied how leaves bent, how ground dipped, and how vines twisted. A broken branch wasn't just a trip hazard, it was a message. Someone passed here. Sometimes the forest spoke more clearly than any scout. Their tracking skills extended further. If they found signs of Viet Cong movement, cigarette ash, faint footprints, disturbed roots, they adjusted their path immediately. They avoided trails the enemy would expect. They moved uphill to gain an advantage. They crossed streams at bends to reduce footprints. They avoided muddy patches that could hold impressions. Every choice protected them from being discovered. But even with their silence, the SAS understood that the jungle had layers of sound. Birds, insects, and wind created a constant background murmur. When something unusual happened, that natural rhythm shifted. Experienced SAS patrols could sense these changes. If birds suddenly stopped calling, it often meant movement nearby. If insects became louder in a certain direction, it could mean the enemy disturbed them. The SAS learned to read these signs like a second language. The Viet Cong were already masters of jungle movement, famous for their ability to slip through terrain quickly and quietly. Yet even they were impressed and unsettled by the Australian skill. Many VC scouts reported that the SAS left almost no trace. They spoke of footprints so faint they could barely be seen even when kneeling over them. They described enemy patrols that seemed to appear in one location and disappear minutes later without explanation. Some Viet Cong believed the Australians used special equipment or strange technology. Others thought the SAS inserted through helicopters in impossible places. The truth was simpler: discipline and training. The SAS spent hours every day practicing movement, stalking, camouflage, and low-profile navigation. What looked supernatural to observers was simply the result of relentless repetition. The SAS also mastered speed control. When danger increased, they slowed until even breathing became controlled. They often moved so quietly that enemy patrols walked past them unaware. To avoid alerting the enemy, SAS soldiers sometimes lowered their heart rates deliberately during stressful moments. They remained still, slow and unseen even when adrenaline surged. A disciplined mind protected disciplined movement. At observation posts, their silence intensified. An SAS team could lie in a single position for hours, sometimes entire nights, without shifting more than a few millimeters. They built hides using natural materials, matching every color and texture to avoid detection. They watched enemy camps from just a few dozen meters away, listening to conversations, counting equipment, tracking patrol cycles. Their reports guided airstrikes, ambushes, and major operations. The Viet Cong never understood how accurately the Australians predicted their movements. Another advantage came from their spacing. Each man kept a distance of several meters, sometimes more depending on terrain. This spacing prevented ambushes from taking out multiple soldiers with a single burst of fire. It also reduced the chances of noise spreading through the patrol. Only the point man needed to be perfectly silent. The rest followed his lead. If the point man froze, everyone froze. If he moved, they moved. The system eliminated confusion and kept the entire patrol coordinated. Night movement demanded even greater discipline. Without light, the patrol relied on touch and instinct. The point man felt tree roots with his boots. The next man felt the shoulder of the man ahead. They breathed softly and watched for silhouettes. The jungle amplified every step at night. Yet SAS patrols moved with such care that even nocturnal animals barely noticed. The Viet Cong preferred night operations, but they soon realized the Australians could match them step for step. Over time, fear grew. The Viet Cong began calling the SAS Marung, phantoms of the jungle. Survivors of encounters described hearing nothing before the first shots. Others said they fired at shadows that vanished instantly. The psychological effect mattered more than numbers. The SAS killed fewer enemies than big American units. But every death they caused delivered a message. You are not safe, not even in your own jungle. The Australian SAS became invisible, not through magic, but through mastery of the basics: silence, patience, terrain, discipline, and trust. These skills made them one of the few Western units that the Viet Cong truly feared. They understood that firepower could be faced, but an unseen enemy could not. When the Australian SAS finally chose to engage, it was never by accident. Their entire doctrine centered on information, not volume of fire. They didn't hunt for big battles. They hunted for decisive moments. Every shot had purpose. Every burst had intention. And when contact came, it happened so fast and so clean that Viet Cong fighters often didn't understand what hit them. Most SAS patrols aimed to avoid fighting altogether. Their job was to observe enemy routes, camps, and supply lines. But sometimes a target appeared that they couldn't ignore. An exposed patrol, a messenger crossing open ground, or a small squad preparing an ambush. The SAS didn't take unnecessary risks. They waited for angles, timing, and certainty. When the point man raised his hand, froze, and signaled prepare, everyone understood that a strike might be seconds away. One of their signature techniques was the snap ambush. Unlike large American ambushes that involved heavy claymores, machine guns, and dozens of men, the SAS preferred sudden controlled strikes. The idea was simple: hit hard for a few seconds, break the enemy's formation, then disappear before reinforcements could respond. A typical snap ambush lasted no more than 10 to 15 seconds. The patrol arranged in a shallow arc. Each man covered a defined sector. They lay low in the vegetation, waiting for the enemy to enter the kill zone. No one breathed too loudly. No one shifted. The jungle humidity made sweat drip into their eyes, but they didn't blink. They waited for the commander's signal, a quick squeeze of the shoulder, a flick of the fingers. Then the jungle exploded. The Australian 5.56mm rifles barked in tight, controlled bursts. The machine gunner fired a short, precise stream to pin the enemy down. Grenades were rare, but used if necessary. The point man and second in command controlled the opening shots to break momentum. Every action in that small window shaped the outcome. Viet Cong fighters were used to ambushing. They knew how to spring traps, how to control terrain, how to use surprise, but they struggled when ambushed by someone more silent, more patient, and more accurate than themselves. Snap ambushes robbed them of preparation. Instead of facing a large American force that could be predicted, they faced 6 men who moved like hunters. The SAS didn't stay to fight long. Once their bursts were delivered, they executed a break contact drill, another technique drilled into them endlessly. The steps were simple but effective. After firing, the patrol threw off the enemy's aim by moving diagonally or slipping into thicker vegetation. The machine gunner provided a final covering burst, then followed the team. The radio operator transmitted a short contact report. Then the patrol vanished, often before the Viet Cong could fire back accurately. This tactic frustrated enemy commanders. They expected Western soldiers to press the attack or call for reinforcements. Instead, SAS teams were gone before the enemy regrouped. They didn't need to win battles. They needed to deliver precise damage and escape intact. This approach made them unpredictable, and unpredictability breeds fear. Another tactic the SAS used effectively was the silent withdrawal. If an enemy patrol came too close, the Australians didn't always engage. Sometimes they slipped aside like water flowing around a rock. They flattened themselves into the ground, controlled their breathing, and let the enemy pass only a few meters away. Once the danger moved past, the patrol could stalk them from behind or simply return to their objective. The Viet Cong found this ability unnerving. They relied on hearing and seeing their enemies, but the SAS made no noise. Some VC reports describe spotting Australians only in brief flashes, rifle muzzles, shadows moving sideways, or a momentary silhouette in the foliage. Those moments were usually followed by short bursts of accurate fire. Accuracy was another edge. SAS soldiers practiced shooting at close, mid, and long-range distances under stress. They didn't fire rapidly, they fired deliberately. Each shot counted. They studied recoil, practiced snap shooting, and knew how to fire from awkward positions. Many Viet Cong survivors noted the Australians' precision, burst patterns that struck exactly where intended, even in chaos. Another major advantage was the patrol's calmness under fire. When bullets snapped overhead, they didn't panic or return wildfire. Instead, they followed drilled procedures. The commander picked a direction. The patrol moved quickly but quietly, finding higher ground or thicker cover. They never ran blindly. They didn't shout. Their communication stayed inside hand signals and gestures. This composure came from experience. Many SAS soldiers trained for years before deployment. They ran patrols in Malaysian jungles, learned from British SAS methods, and understood that fear could kill as easily as bullets. The Viet Cong respected this calmness. They said these men did not break. The Australians also excelled in night operations. While the Americans often limited patrols after dark due to visibility issues, the SAS moved comfortably under starlight. They understood how sound traveled at night. They knew how to navigate using tree silhouettes and river flow. Viet Cong fighters preferred night for their own operations, but they soon discovered the Australians were willing to meet them there, and sometimes outmatch them. One common tactic was the last light ambush. As the sun dipped and shadows lengthened, many Viet Cong patrols moved to new positions. The SAS knew this. They used this shift to their advantage. In the fading light, they set ambushes on narrow tracks, creek crossings, or natural choke points. When the enemy approached, often relaxed and less alert, the Australians struck quickly and melted away into the dark. By the time the Viet Cong tried to chase, the jungle had swallowed their attackers. The psychological effect was profound. Viet Cong units adjusted their movements. They avoided certain areas. They warned each other not to underestimate the silent ones. Some commanders ordered patrols to avoid narrow paths at dusk. Others changed routes entirely after spotting a single footprint or hearing a faint rustle they couldn't explain. The SAS achieved this impact not through numbers or firepower, but through timing, precision, and discipline. Their strikes were surgical. Their escapes were clean. Their presence felt larger than their actual numbers. In a war defined by noise, machines, and explosive power, the Australians offered something different, a methodical, controlled style of contact that left the enemy shaken and unsure. They proved that a small team, properly trained and mentally sharp, could shape an entire battlefield. This combination of stealth and sudden violence cemented their reputation. To the Viet Cong, the SAS were not just dangerous. They were professionals who attacked with intent and vanished with purpose. And that reputation would only grow as the war continued. Endurance is more than fitness. In the jungle, endurance is a state of mind. The Australian SAS knew this better than almost any unit in Vietnam. Their missions pushed them far past comfort, sleep, and routine. The jungle tested every weakness: heat, insects, terrain, hunger, fear, and the constant pressure of being behind enemy lines. But the SAS learned to carry that weight with calm, steady discipline. This chapter explores that mindset, the human factor behind their operations, and the psychological edge that made the Viet Cong fear them long before shots were fired. A normal patrol for many American units lasted a day or two before resupply. The SAS often stayed out for 10 days, sometimes longer if the mission demanded. They carried limited rations, usually dehydrated food, biscuits, small tins, and carefully measured water. Every item had to be packed tight, tied down, and secured. Extra gear didn't just slow movement, it made noise. Noise meant risk. Risk meant death. Their packs were heavy, but the real burden came from constant awareness. Every SAS soldier operated in a state of quiet alertness. Not panic, not tension, just a steady, focused readiness. They listened to everything: the rustle of leaves, distant footsteps, insects going silent, the shift of wind direction. That level of vigilance drained energy faster than running. It worked on the mind hour after hour. At night, the jungle changed. The heat eased, but the darkness became absolute. No lights were used. Even watches with glowing paint were covered or taped. The Australians learned to move by feel, boots brushing the ground lightly, hands touching tree trunks, hearing the soft flow of water to stay oriented. They slept in short bursts, usually no more than 20 to 30 minutes. One man always stayed awake, often two. They rotated silently, making sure the team never lost awareness. Sleep deprivation became normal. The Australians trained to function under minimal rest. Their focus did not fade. Their spacing stayed tight. Their signals stayed crisp. The Viet Cong, who expected Western soldiers to struggle with fatigue, found themselves up against men who operated calmly even on 2 hours of sleep across several days. The environment punished bodies as much as minds. Humidity soaked uniforms until they never fully dried. Feet softened, blistered, and sometimes bled inside boots. Leeches attached themselves to skin. Sweat stung eyes, muscles cramped from long periods of stillness. Yet SAS soldiers learned to push through all of it without complaint. Complaints wasted energy. Complaints broke focus. Focus kept them alive. Their training implanted a simple rule. Small teams only survive when every man carries his share. Trust wasn't optional, it was everything. Each man relied on the others, not just for fire support, but for silence, spacing, discipline, and decisions. In a four-man patrol, one mistake from one soldier could expose the entire team. The SAS understood that they weren't just fighting the Viet Cong, they were fighting the jungle itself. The mind also felt the pressure of isolation. Large American units moved with the comfort of numbers. Helicopters, artillery, and radios stood ready to help. SAS patrols, deep in enemy territory, couldn't rely on quick backup. They traveled far from bases. If injured, evacuation wasn't guaranteed. They knew that if something went wrong, they had to fix it themselves or endure until extraction became possible. That knowledge demanded a level of mental toughness that set them apart. Hypervigilance became second nature. SAS soldiers could identify smells, smoke from a distant fire, sweat from an enemy camp, even cooking rice deep in the forest. They learned to read the jungle like a book. A broken branch with fresh sap meant recent movement. Mud displaced differently on a trail meant someone passed within hours. They noticed patterns, where grass lay flat, where birds avoided certain trees, where water rippled without wind. That attention to detail wasn't just skill, it was survival. Viet Cong fighters noticed this mental discipline. They observed Australian patrols that moved slowly, never rushed, never overreacted. Even after ambushes, the SAS moved with method, not panic. Their calmness under pressure made enemy fighters uneasy. Many Viet Cong interviews later described the Australians as cold and patient. Not emotional, not impulsive, just steady. Another psychological edge came from the SAS motto, "Who dares wins." It wasn't just a slogan, it shaped their mindset. They embraced difficult terrain, long missions, and uncertainty. They accepted discomfort as normal. When challenges grew, they didn't see hardship, they saw opportunity. That mental framework intimidated the Viet Cong, who respected soldiers that endured the jungle without fear. One common SAS practice involved lying completely still for long hours. Observation posts sometimes required men to remain flat on their stomachs all day, barely shifting to avoid detection. Flies crawled across their faces. Mosquitoes bit through fabric. Sweat ran down their backs, yet they didn't move. Movement risked detection. Detection risked the entire patrol. Their endurance under these conditions impressed even experienced enemy trackers. This calm discipline also appeared during firefights. When bullets cracked through branches and snapped overhead, many soldiers might instinctively dip or shout. SAS troops reacted differently. They stayed low, moved precisely, and followed drilled procedures. No wasted motion, no yelling, just action. Enemy fighters noticed this difference immediately. The Viet Cong also understood the importance of mental dominance. They used fear as a weapon, booby traps, psychological pressure, nighttime attacks. But when they faced the SAS, fear shifted direction. When an enemy patrol realized Australians were in the area, uncertainty grew. Would they strike suddenly? Would they watch silently from the trees? Would they set a trap? The unknown became a weapon. The SAS didn't need to fight constantly. Their reputation did much of the work. The jungle respected endurance. It tested every soldier, but the SAS embraced the test. They learned to operate smoothly despite hunger, exhaustion, and stress. Their breathing stayed steady, their communication stayed silent, their patience stayed intact. This psychological strength created an edge the Viet Cong couldn't fully match. By mastering endurance, physical and mental, the SAS became more than observers. They became ghosts that could wait, watch, and act with purpose. Their calmness under fire, their steady alertness, and their trust in small team operations gave them a psychological advantage no enemy could fully understand. And in a war where the unseen often mattered more than the visible, that quiet psychological edge became one of their most powerful weapons. Reputation in war travels faster than any patrol. It moves through whispers, prisoner reports, intercepted messages, and quiet comments exchanged between enemy soldiers who have seen something they can't forget. By the late years of the Australian involvement in Vietnam, the SAS had earned a reputation that went far beyond what any small unit could normally achieve. Their presence alone changed how Viet Cong units operated, how they moved, and where they dared to go. This final chapter explores that reputation, how it formed, how it spread, and why it had such a powerful effect on the Viet Cong mindset. It was not built on numbers. It wasn't built on large battles or loud victories. It was built on silence, precision, and the knowledge that danger could appear without warning and vanish just as quickly. At first, the Viet Cong knew the Australians only as another foreign force entering the conflict. They expected them to fight like the Americans: large patrols, noisy movements, heavy reliance on helicopters and supporting fire. But early encounters changed that assumption instantly. Survivors of ambushes described attacks that lasted only seconds but left devastating results. They spoke of enemies who did not shout, did not charge recklessly, and did not panic under fire. They spoke of sudden bursts of accurate rounds, followed by silence. Captured documents revealed something striking. Viet Cong commanders specifically warned units about enemy patrols that moved like locals. This was a reference to the SAS. Their ability to blend into the jungle created confusion. Many VC believed these Australians were trained by local tribes or had lived in the jungle for years. Others thought they used special equipment that made them quieter. Rumors grew quickly. One report found by intelligence analysts mentioned footsteps that do not match foreign troops. Another described SAS patrols as shadows that slip through the trees. Some Viet Cong fighters, deeply experienced in jungle warfare, admitted their discomfort when tracking Australians. Footprints were softer. Branches were left unbroken. Even disturbed grass seemed to settle more naturally after an SAS patrol passed. These details left scouts uneasy. The SAS reputation wasn't limited to stealth. Their discipline under pressure impressed enemy fighters. Viet Cong units were used to Western soldiers reacting loudly when ambushed, shouting commands, calling for support, firing wildly. But SAS patrols responded with calm precision. Their break contact drills were fast, controlled, and designed exactly for jungle fighting. They didn't lose formation. They didn't panic. They moved like a single organism. Every time a patrol escaped an ambush without casualties, the legend grew. Every time they struck quickly and vanished, the legend hardened. Eventually, Viet Cong units began avoiding certain routes, especially narrow trails at dusk. They changed routines, altered camp setups, and reduced movement in areas where the Australians were suspected to be operating. An intercepted Viet Cong transmission once advised a unit to shift 3 kilometers west. The enemy who walks in silence is near. That line became a favorite among SAS veterans. It confirmed what they already sensed. The enemy respected them at a level few Western forces achieved in Vietnam. Another source of their growing reputation came from interrogations of prisoners. Many captured Viet Cong described the Australians as hard men who seemed to endure the jungle naturally. They noted how Australians did not appear exhausted even after long movements. They pointed out their patience, the ability to sit still for hours or move slowly without frustration. This psychological strength unnerved enemy fighters who relied on stealth themselves. It signaled a new kind of opponent, one they could not easily predict. The SAS also gained a reputation for accuracy. Enemy fighters who survived snap ambushes consistently reported that Australians fired fewer rounds but more effectively. They remembered bursts that hit targets cleanly, not spraying at random. The Viet Cong understood the difference between chaotic fire and professional fire. The SAS represented the latter. But the strongest factor shaping their reputation was this: the SAS rarely revealed themselves unless absolutely necessary. Some Viet Cong units reported that they never saw the Australians directly. They only found signs, Tracks, disturbed foliage, empty observation posts, or sudden, precise ambushes followed by total silence. The unknown became more frightening than the known. Soldiers feared what they could not locate. In many conflicts, large armies dominate through shock and awe, but the SAS dominated through uncertainty. The Viet Cong were experts at creating fear through mines, traps, and ambushes. Yet in the Australians, they found opponents who reversed that psychological weapon. Now the Viet Cong were the ones looking over their shoulders. One senior Viet Cong commander later admitted that he told his men to avoid certain parts of Phuoc Tuy province because the small enemy teams there do not fear us. This was a remarkable statement. The Viet Cong, famous for their toughness, acknowledged a foreign unit that made them cautious. The SAS didn't seek fame for this reputation. Many veterans rarely spoke about their experiences after the war. Their missions were secretive. Their success came from being unseen, not celebrated. But within Vietnam, especially among enemy ranks, their effect was undeniable. In addition to fear, the SAS earned respect. Viet Cong units knew the Australians fought differently. They didn't rely on overwhelming strength. They relied on skills, silent movement, precise fire, careful planning, and deep reconnaissance. That approach demanded discipline, mental toughness, and professionalism. Many Viet Cong recognized these qualities, even if they fought against them. This reputation also influenced friendly forces. American units operating nearby often received intelligence from SAS patrols that shaped their own missions. Australian infantry battalions trusted SAS reports fully. When the SAS said an area was clear, it usually was. When they said enemy forces were nearby, units prepared immediately. Their reliability reinforced their legendary status. When the Australian SAS withdrew in 1971, they left a legacy that outlived their deployment. The Viet Cong continued to reference their tactics for years. Western militaries studied their methods. Modern special forces still use variations of their reconnaissance principles, movement drills, and ambush strategies. Their approach became part of the wider special operations doctrine around the world. In the end, the fear the Viet Cong felt wasn't based on superstition or myths. It came from real encounters, real losses, and real observations. The Australians proved that a small, disciplined team could navigate one of the harshest environments on Earth with skill and patience. They showed that silence could be stronger than gunfire. They demonstrated that professionalism could outweigh numbers. The Viet Cong learned these lessons the hard way. And because of that, they feared the Australian SAS more than any American unit, not for who they were, but for how they fought.